We have a quorum, ladies and gentlemen. We call this meeting of the Full Ways and Means Committee to order. Chair recognizes Chairman Parrish. Please, sir, to tell us about House Resolution 1203 and House Bill 1020, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your indulgence on this. If you remember, we passed this bill out a few days ago and brought it back to make a couple of tweaks, which I think actually have improved this. Basically, if you remember, with the ELOS money right now, the only thing that's used for is for capital projects. What we were proposing, it could be capital projects, it could be maintenance and operation, and a rollback of the ad valorem tax if they so choose. It's just like we've had before, would require a referendum. This would apply only to those that legislation passed after January of next year, would not be retroactive.
Did it also take care of the issues where you might have more than one school system in a county? Is everybody satisfied with that?
Absolutely, and to the best of my knowledge, everybody's okay with that, sir.
I don't see any questions. Any member of the committee wish to be heard on this matter? We're talking about, there we go, Vice Chairman Sims.
At the proper time, Mr. Chairman.
Do you have a question? No, I was going to do the same thing with Vice Chairman. Oh, okay. Any member of the committee wish to be heard on the proposition House Resolution? I guess we ought to take the bill first. House Bill 1020. I don't see anybody. What's the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1020? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. All right, House Resolution 1203. Any member of the committee wish to be heard on this proposition? I see nobody. We have a motion do pass. I have a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. We'll try to get it in rules before they close at 8:30, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Chairman Manning here. How about Chairman Parsons? Are you with us? Yeah. Chairman Stevens. House Bill 1049, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, this bill is a bill originally drafted for the arts. It has since then been drafted to exactly mirror the SPLOST language. It is a SPLOST, a special purpose local option sales tax, that allows in increments of a tenth of a penny to be dedicated to specific projects in the arts. And essentially that's it in a nutshell, Mr. Chairman. It can be substituted for a SPLOST once it expires, or even an ELOST.
Any member of the committee have any questions for the presenter? Yes, sir. Representative Flood.
I'd like to be recognized for a motion at the appropriate time.
Any questions for the presenter? Otherwise, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Move do pass.
Second.
Chairman Flood has moved do pass. We have a second by our Vice Chairman. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Passes unanimously. Thank you. Representative Knight, House, you recognize, please, sir, tell us about House Bill 1219.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 1219 is a bill that simply does away with the refundable portion of low-income tax credits. Let me repeat. We are not doing away with the low-income tax credit. We are simply doing away with the refundable portion. And what I mean by that, members of the committee, is that we have people who have no tax liability whatsoever to the state. Zero. And yet this state is writing them a check. And you'll notice that there's an updated fiscal note in your package. It shows the actual amount of refundable tax credits. In other words, the amount that we're writing back to taxpayers with zero tax liability. They paid nothing into the state. They owe the state nothing. We are actually refunding them amounts over the last 4 years from 18 all the way up to $20 million. And again, we're not doing away with it. We're simply saying, hey, you can't get the refundable portion of it. And that's what this bill does.
Chairman, you yield to questions?
Yes, I will.
Chair recognizes Representative Abrams.
Thank you. And thank you, Chairman. Can you explain the history of this refundable credit and who currently uses it?
I think the history is such that when we had a grocery tax at the state level, they had put that in as a way to refund that because we were taxing it. But as the representative knows, we no longer tax groceries, even though I know my seatmate here would love to put it back on there. We don't do that anymore.
Do we know then who is actually collecting this credit? Which population of the low income is actually currently collecting this credit?
I do not know what section is, but I'm not sure what your question is.
So we have the population of the low income who are collecting a credit. They're not collecting it based on sales tax revenue or sales tax against food, but they are collecting $18 million. Do we know which portion of the low-income population? So are we talking about senior citizens who'd be impacted by this? Are we talking about, do we know which groups are actually going to suddenly lose this credit, which is a fairly substantial amount?
All I know is it is based upon the federal adjusted gross income. Mm-hmm. So it could be anyone across the board that could have a federal adjusted gross income between certain levels. And again, Representative Abrams, we're not doing away with the low-income tax credit. We're simply saying that we'll let you relieve any tax liability that you may have. We'll offset it with that credit, but we're no longer going to refund this and make it a refundable tax credit.
Thank you.
Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along similar lines, the amount of the tax credit that is in the fiscal note, is that the total amount of tax credits that were issued?
No. This is only the refundable portion. There were more credits that were out there that were used. This is only the portion that was refundable. Basically, these citizens have no tax liability whatsoever with the state of Georgia. They paid in zero income taxes. They owed zero income taxes. And the state wrote them a check for nothing. I mean, for no tax liability.
Further question. If they didn't pay any income taxes, would they be, they're filing an income tax, they're filing for the state income tax. Mm-hmm. They have no income and they did not pay out any.
No, I'm not saying they had no income. They
but if they had income, they probably would have paid some income tax, state income tax.
Not necessarily.
Thank you.
Who is 29? Is that Chairman May?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the appropriate time, I would just like to be recognized to make a motion.
Okay. 13 is Representative Taylor. Is that right?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there any refundable corporate income taxes?
Representative Taylor, I'm not sure if there are or not, but we're not dealing with corporate income taxes here. We're dealing with individual income taxes.
I got that. I was just wondering if there was the same situation on the corporate side, if there were corporations that had no tax liability, yet the state was sending them a check.
I doubt it. Usually most of your corporates are dealt with or able to either carry back losses or carry forward losses. So as far as a general rule, I would think that the corporate income tax, no, the answer would be no to that. They usually get to carry losses back or forward. But to my knowledge, there's no general refundable income tax credit.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Battles.
I believe what we're talking about here, we're using actually the word refunded, that as though they had paid something in and they were getting a refund of overpayment. This is actually above their liability for payment. So they've paid nothing in to get this back. And this is above whatever they have been responsible for as far as taxes. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Chair recognizes Chairman May for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion we do pass by committee substitute.
A motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Okay, well, let's get a hand count on that. Aye, please raise your either hand. Nays? I've got a 14-4. Motion carries. It'll be in rules. Thank you. That was kind of a loud nay. It was difficult to tell the volume down there. Chairman Manning, I see you've joined us. Tell us about your House Bill 1198, please, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry. I had to do a couple of things. This is a new LC number. It's 189158S. And this is a bill that is for deferred tax income to be taxed if someone in Georgia has been employed in Georgia and then retires to another state, that we can collect the taxable income after they leave the state. And it also includes those persons who come to our state and have entertainment performances, concerts and stuff. If they net over $5,000, that they can also be taxed. It's a new ELSA number.
Any member of the committee wish to be heard on this proposition or ask any questions? I think it's an excellent bill and great work by Chairman Manning. What's the pleasure of the committee? A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you, Chairman Manning.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Chairman Parsons, 7 there. You recognize, please, sir, to represent House Bill 1240.
Thank you, Chairman. I apologize. I'm trying to get a bill out of another committee that's still meeting over there right now. I have, it's House Bill 1240 that we've got out of the Sales Tax Subcommittee this morning. Mr. Chairman, I tried to get a substitute drawn up. It was not ready a couple hours ago, 3 hours ago, and it's still not ready. I do have language here that I'd like to present as an amendment that the committee could put in as a substitute. But there were the difference is there was a question this morning in the subcommittee on this bill about, first of all, what the bill does. It provides that sales tax be collected down to the zip +4 at the location that a sale is made to for a delivery or services provided to or whatever. There were some questions this morning about whether or not a retail location like a 7-Eleven or whatever would have to record the zip +4 and report that of every customer that came in to buy a candy bar or whatever. And that's not what certainly wasn't the intention. I don't think that bill would have required that the language was there. But we do have language that would clarify that the retail establishment would not have to collect that kind of information. That it would be based upon the point of the location of the entity, the person that received the service or the sale was delivered to.
Chairman, if I could ask you to suspend my fault, not yours. We're working from LC 189161S, which I believe is the sub. Can I hand you a copy and see if this incorporates, not that one. Here, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, okay. Well, then you
see if this incorporates the language you're talking about, and if it does,
yes,
we don't have to deal with
it. Yes, Chairman, that is the sub, yes.
Okay.
And basically it does three things. I mean, there's three parts of it, or three statements, and the first is that whenever any provision of the chapter provides for the levy imposition, collection, of distribution, and sales by any county municipality, any requirement that such tax be levied, imposed, or collected would be based upon the primary address or primary place of primary use of the person or entity subject to the tax, down to the zip +4. The second is that where the delivery and possession of the property or services are subject to the sales and use tax occurs at the retail location, then they would provide the zip +4. And then the third part is that where delivery and possession of the personal property or services subject to the sales is at another location, then the zip code zip +4 would be used for that as the location to get it down to the zip +4.
Any questions, members of the committee?
Okay, I don't see any. Any other member of the committee wish to be heard on this proposition? I don't see any further comment. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Passes unanimously. Chairman Parsons, thank you.
Thank you,
By
Chairman.
committee sub.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, we didn't get that sub to you soon enough. That was our fault, not yours. We apologize for that. Okay, I saw a quick in and out by Representative Lindsay there. Representative Knight, you recognize to tell us about House Bill 299, please, sir.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Everyone is aware of the difficult economic times that this nation, and only this nation but the state, is in. And one of the big holes that I think we're all experiencing is in the area of health care. And HB 299 simply takes away or repeals the sales and use tax exemption for non-profit hospitals. It does not include the local portion. And while the effort that is out there on all of the medical community's part it's applaudable, but you know, this year this body has offered several issues, especially like in the area of the provider fee, which was turned down. Basically, that option would have taken money, sent it back up to the feds, and brought more money back down for health care. And that option was not acceptable. And there's not many alternatives left, and simply House Bill 299 is another alternative that we can help pay for health care in the state of Georgia.
Members of the committee, be advised, I intend to limit debate on this to 10 minutes. We're under a deadline as far as the clerk's office is concerned. I do intend to submit this proposition to a vote. With that in mind, Representative Flood, you recognize for a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author, the fiscal note shows a fairly significant tax impact. I'm not sure that I clearly understand. Is the estimation that the tax exemption will range from $105 to $158 million per year starting in 2011?
Actually, yes, and it will, based on a 1.5% growth rate, you're looking at the same numbers I am. It's between 108 and 162 million. That's the low and high range.
A couple of questions about that. Do you have a sense of how? Do you anticipate that the hospitals will pass this additional cost increase to their patients?
I'm not sure about that. I think that we're giving. They shouldn't. They're a charitable organization. We would hope that they would be providing a lot of this care, and we've given them the tax breaks in order for them to. They don't pay, as you know, they don't pay property taxes at the local level. They don't pay sales and use tax currently, and they don't pay income taxes. So we're hoping that. With those tax breaks, we would expect them to hopefully provide the care and wouldn't have to raise costs or raise the charges.
If they're not able to simply absorb these costs, which $162 million is a pretty significant amount of money, do you have a sense of how many employees might potentially be laid off with the kind of additional
Representative Flood, you've got some of the data that I had. I know we passed it out in subcommittee. Grabbed it. Looking at some of the net income from some of these hospitals, I would say they're doing pretty well. And I would think that looking at their balance sheets and the reserves that they have on hand, that they wouldn't have to do that. They wouldn't have to raise their cost or lay off anyone.
Thank you.
Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are we going to have any testimony on this? Because I'm not on that subcommittee, so I'm.
No, sir, we're not.
No, sir. Do you know the impact that this would have on Grady Hospital?
I do not.
You don't. Okay, thank you.
Representative Abrams.
Thank you. And just to, and I appreciate the opportunity to ask some questions, because there was no testimony from the affected hospitals in subcommittee, nor was there any analysis of the fiscal note. But there was a document that was handed to us that had the top 29 hospitals. Chairman Knight, do you know how many of the hospitals on that list are actually nonprofit or authority hospitals that are not actually impacted by the sales tax?
I'm not sure that any of them would not be impacted.
Well, actually, because this would only remove the nonprofit tax exemption sales tax, several of the hospitals on this do not currently qualify for that. My second question would be, if you're aware that authorities, which are government-created hospitals, would face an impact between $65.7 million and $98.6 million if this passes, based on the fiscal note and the range of 20 to 30%. That only governmental hospitals being affected would have a $65.7 million to a $98.6 million hit based on the sales tax. Were you aware of that?
I was aware of the whole figure in the aggregate.
My next question is, were you aware that the nonprofit hospitals would face between $40 million and $60 million, and that the state itself, the three institutes, the three hospitals managed by the state, would face between a $4 and $8 million sales tax hit based on their status, but that none of the for-profit hospitals listed on your list with the higher balance sheets would actually be impacted because they are not-for-profit hospitals under the terms of this legislation? So that this would only come from nonprofit and state-run and local-run hospitals, but not from any of the any of the for-profit hospitals that have the egregious balance sheets that you pointed to.
Well, actually, if you look at the numbers, some of the more egregious balance sheets are with the nonprofit hospitals.
Can you point one out to me?
Well, let's look at the Scottish Rite.
And can you tell me of Scottish Rite how much of that is actually the cost of the building and the facilities and the specialized equipment that they're required to maintain in order to provide the specialized service that they provide to the children of Atlanta?
Representative, we've discussed this in committee, and we can sit here and discuss this all day long. But the net income of $75 million. There's no telling if you were able to put that away year after year after year, how much your balance sheet would increase. Now, I'm not going to sit here and argue with the numbers. The issue is this state has some health care needs. One of the biggest holes in our health care budget, or our budget this year, is circling around health care. And there's been several options that have been put out on the table to help try to fill that hole. And we're just out of options. None has been acceptable up until this point. And this is another option that hopefully will allow us to provide health care to Georgia citizens.
Representative Mosby, I know you deal in this all day, every day. You're recognized, please, sir, for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once this becomes an expense to the hospital, if you take a hospital like Representative Taylor asked about Grady, it becomes part of its cost structure on its SHPA report. When you start designing, when you look at how the hospital is going to be reimbursed back from Medicaid, this becomes part of the cost structure. So you actually will rebuild the state this money back. You understand that?
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe not.
Well, basically, you build your cost and you report that to the state, and the state reimburses the hospital back the cost that it expends up to, in Grady's case, around 85% of cost. So there will be some monies that the state would have to pay back in order to cover this cost that Grady will. Hospitals like Grady. I guess my question to you, would you be willing to look at maybe exempting out those disproportionate share hospitals?
Representative, there's a bill that will be heard tomorrow that talks about disclosing for nonprofits the exact amount of charity care and other community benefits. I think at this point, I'm not sure we can segregate everything out, and I would encourage you and others to come and hear that bill and see if we can pass something that maybe in the future would allow us to distinguish in a factual way the differences between the hospitals that may be fulfilling their duties versus the ones that are not.
All right.
Chairman Sims.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a statement and a
Be recognized for a question.
And a question at the end. It'll be
let's do the question first.
The question is, why do we want to ride the backs of sick folks in order to tax them when we have a bill out there that'll fix this problem? I've said this over and over and over again, and I've said if we're going to fix our problem, we have a $1.1 billion bill that would fix it. And now we're going to tax folks that are sick. And I just cannot do that with the way I do things. I deal with folks like that all day long. And I just cannot do that. It's just wrong. I'm sorry.
Do you want to try to respond to that or not? Are there any further questions for the presenter of the bill? I'd just like the committee to know that under consideration again tomorrow is a provider fee bill that will indeed do exactly what Representative Mosby has suggested here. It has been opposed by all the hospital alliances up to now. Would have raised something like close to $300 million of new revenue for those Medicaid recipients that you're talking about and other uncompensated or charity care, whatever generic term you want to use, would have paid back more to Grady, more to Savannah Memorial than they ever would put in on the provider fee bill. Yet all of the alliances of the hospitals sent 40-some-odd CEOs up here to essentially poison the well. And Grady was never heard from, nor was Savannah Memorial or some of the other high indigent care providers, Children's of Atlanta, whatever the formal name. They're the only ones that have come out now and evaluated and said, yes, that would have really worked for Georgia and the people in Georgia that need this care the most. Yet the lobbyists that lobbied against that and sent all those oppositions up here would have cost less than $75 million to the donor hospitals. The ones that don't provide the indigent care, unlike Grady, and the ones that take very seriously that charitable outcome. We'll get to vote on that tomorrow. But if that's not successful because of all these lobbyists, which if we just had the $4 or $5 million they're paid to convince us otherwise, to not do what is the responsible thing for the people of Georgia, then this is the only way to fill that hole, to do a balanced budget. That's the problem that we're dealing with here. There is a very good chance that there possibly will be carve-outs on those that this is not to punish anybody. This is to deal with the dire circumstances that we face today, which, by the way, have been amplified and exacerbated by the recent federal legislation. If the impact on Medicaid is what everybody thinks it will be, there's another $1 billion coming that we have to deal with in some way or another, and it all has to do with our cohesive nature with us and the federal government, and that is a mix, as you know, with Medicaid. We share in the Medicaid cost at the state level with the federal government. So I hope people will show up for the appropriations meeting. I hope they'll take the trouble this time to listen to the facts and not the lobbyists necessarily, and let's do a responsible method of taking care of the people of Georgia. I hope that's what we hear from, so we don't have to say things like the budget is balanced on the back of the sick, because that's absolutely not true. Is there any further discussion on this bill? Chair recognizes Chairman Roberts for a motion. One question.
I had a question. Mr. Chairman, is this not just for us to have the opportunity to continue to move this bill through the process and give us another alternative as we move forward?
It is the only alternative if we don't have success in the other ways of dealing with that. And we continue to keep listening to the multi-million-dollar paid lobbyists on how we ought to deal rather than what we are up here to do is represent the people of Georgia. This will probably be the only alternative we're left with. And yes, it will be moving through the process.
I move do pass, Mr. Chairman.
I have a motion do pass. I have a second. Is there any further discussion, Representative Abrams?
Thank you. And with all due respect to the chairman and to the author of the bill, this bill has not been subjected to public hearing. The very detailed questions that I've posed in 2 separate subcommittee hearings have not been responded to. The documents that we were given that list both the balance sheet and the income statements do not provide a full picture of the impact that this will have on nonprofit and authority-driven hospitals. And I think that while it absolutely is one alternative to solving the budget crisis, there are many alternatives, including legislation by Representative Flood that would have frozen sales tax exemptions on other entities. And so I do think it's slightly disingenuous to say that this is the only solution. My concern is that we have not been, as a committee that is obligated to fully vet tax policy, not for potential political use, but for the policy benefit. This policy would create a $150 million hit to nonprofit and government-funded hospitals, which means that taxpayers are going to pay the bill either as patients or as citizens. And I do think that it is very relevant that we evaluate the actual cost of this and who has to pay it. And I'm disturbed by the fact that this bill has moved so quickly without public testimony of any kind to actually evaluate what has happened, what will happen to nonprofit hospitals, authority hospitals, and local government hospitals. And I do strongly object to the movement of this bill without that full vetting.
The lady has that right. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion do pass, please signify. Well, go ahead and raise your hand. I realize we're probably going to have to have a hand count. Okay, opposed? Motion carries 12-6. Representative Lindsay.
Mr. Chairman, as the committee is well aware, we've been working on H. 59 for 3 public hearings on it. This afternoon, the Department of Revenue, in consultation with the GBI, have come with some rather substantial concerns about the bill and some rather substantial changes. And quite frankly, given that fact, they have taken a lot of the protections out that Chairman Rice wanted to have in there. They have also recommended some new changes as well. We're simply not ready to go forward. I don't know if you have a hearing scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, but given the fact that this is a revenue enhancement bill in addition to an attempt to clean up the industry, I would ask, if possible, if you have a hearing scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, to put us on the calendar for tomorrow afternoon and let me try to meet with these parties who apparently just discovered a bill that's been around for over a year. And see if I can't, with perhaps Ms. Napier's help and Legislative Council, we can come up with an agreement that would satisfy all parties. If not, I'll ask that you take it off tomorrow. If possible, Mr. Chairman, if you could indulge me. And I do apologize to the committee. This was something that was handed to us, what was it, Lindsay, about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock this afternoon?
I suspect, Mr. Whip, that we might be able to arrange one last meeting. I was hoping this would be our last. But,
I was hoping to move this to rules today, Mr. Chairman.
Under those circumstances, and I know you were, I'm sure everybody's going to be around here for appropriation meetings tomorrow anyway, even though it's not a session day. So we'll be glad to entertain the possibility of having another meeting.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, and I do apologize to the committee.
There are none scheduled, though, unless I hear differently from you, and then we'll notify members of the committee. Is there any further? Yes.
I'd like to recommit a bill back.
Okay. State your motion to recommit.
Mr. Chairman?
22, you're on. There you go. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I want to deeply apologize to the committee today. We had a mix-up, and I'd like to make a motion that we send the substitute, the House Bill 1251, back to subcommittee. There was a miscommunication between the members as to regard if this was a first hearing or a second hearing, and we were wrong on that matter, and we need to send this back to subcommittee to make sure we follow the rules and have a second hearing on this.
Did I hear any objection? Motion to recommit? Hearing none, it's recommitted to the subcommittee for further action, possible amendment. Is there any further business come before the committee? Not seeing none, we stand adjourned.